Welcome to episode 61 of the MMA Rundown podcast. First topic I'll be talking about is Amanda Nunes just absolutely dominating Felicia Spencer to retain her featherweight title. I'll then talk about the rest of the card at UFC 250, so I'll just go fight by fight on a recap there. I'll preview the upcoming card. I think it's probably just going to be called UFC Apex again, but it'll be the main event will be between Jessica Eye and Cynthia Calvillo, so I'll just run through the whole card there. Talk about a lot of UFC stars right now trying to renegotiate their contracts. You have Jon Jones is talking about getting released if he doesn't get the money he wants. Jorge Masvidal is saying the same thing. Conor McGregor just said he retired, but it seems as though there's a negotiation going on there as well. And then also Sean O'Malley was talking about his renegotiation, so I'll just recap their situations and give my take on that. There were a bunch of fights that were announced, so I'll go through those. I'll recap a couple of jiu-jitsu events. So there was Who's Number One, which had Gordon Ryan versus Kyle Bain in the main event. And then there was also the Third Coast Grappling Middleweight Kumite, so I'll just go through the results there as well. And like last week where I saved the final topic for what was more political, I think I'm going to do the same this week as well. So the final topics, or I guess final two topics will be, first one is Devin Clark before his fight at UFC 250, knelt in the octagon and raised his fist in solidarity, so I'll give my take on that. And then the last one is a couple of brands in the grappling space that have gotten themselves in trouble because of things that their owners posted. So I'll recap those specific situations and then give my take on them as well. And those two brands were Scrap Life, which is a wrestling apparel company, and also Grappling Games, which is a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu tournament company. So at the start, we have Amanda Nunes versus Felicia Spencer. Going into this fight, one of the things I was talking about is that it is possible that if Felicia Spencer gets us to the ground, especially if she gets top position, that she could have a position where she is better than Amanda Nunes. So there is that possibility that if Spencer gets to her position, she could possibly win that position and even get a finish from it. But the problem for Spencer was that her striking was very poor for her to be able to even set up her takedowns, and her takedowns weren't that good anyway. And that was very apparent in this fight. There were actually a couple times where she timed her shots decently and got in, but just could not follow through the takedowns. And it just got to the point where Amanda Nunes was just like tossing her around, and even early on, you could see that Nunes was sort of taking a GSP approach you've seen in the past, where GSP might fight a wrestler and he'll like go out of his way to out wrestle him and just kind of rub it in, or he'll fight a grappler and he'll just go out of his way to out grapple them, or he'll fight a striker and just try to outstrike him. Even though it might not be the smartest thing, it felt like Amanda Nunes was doing the exact same thing, where she wanted to out grapple Felicia Spencer and really like put a bow on the fight that way. At the end of the fourth round, she was trying to get a finish by rear naked choke, where it looked as though had she just thrown a few really quick strikes, sort of like what Henry Cejudo does, where he just throws really fast just to try to force the rep to jump in as the person doesn't defend properly. Had she done that, she probably gets the TKO finish at the end of the fourth, but instead she was like, no, I want to submit this girl. I really want to make a point here. Actually got the rear naked choke in there. Was pretty close to getting the finish at the end there, but didn't have enough time. And so just throughout the fight, the striking, obviously Nunes had a big edge there, and that was made very clear. The wrestling, Nunes made that a very apparent advantage there as well. Nunes actually looked like a good wrestler in this fight, which is kind of funny because she hasn't really looked like that in any other fights. But Spencer, I guess part of it is that Spencer wasn't all that concerned if she got taken down, but also her wrestling just wasn't looking very good at all in this match. And then in the jiu-jitsu, Nunes for the most part was being fairly careful on top. She wasn't like going out of her way to pass and continue to advance position. If she got on top of half guard, she just kind of hang out there, throw some elbows here and there, not really try to posture up too much or take too much risk with the position. If she was in closed guard, just sort of hunker down. Wouldn't really be trying to pass from there. More so would just be trying to land a couple shots here and there, or just maintain the position. So it's not as though she was like just absolutely running through her from a jiu-jitsu standpoint, but she was getting the takedowns, which in the jiu-jitsu tournament scores. She was getting some pretty good positions as well. And then after rocking Spencer and getting her to turtle up, was able to get the two hooks and take the back and get a choke sunk in. Unfortunately for her, didn't have enough time to finish it. So just all-around domination. There was a lot of talk from the announcement. There were some weird things that were being said by the announcers. I get that Amanda Nunes is head and shoulders above the rest of the girls and at 145, and by rest of the girls I mean like two other girls. She's above the rest of the girls at 135 as well. So heaping praise on her makes sense. With that being said, some of the praise, some of it just wasn't smart from a promotional standpoint, where they're like, yeah, no one can hang with her, because the fact of the matter is that she's going to have another fight, and if you're already telling everyone who's watching her right now that no one can hang with her, then why am I going to want to watch her next fight? Like, you have to, even if you don't believe it, you have to sell a storyline that there's a chance that the challenger is going to be able to beat Nunes. And when you're talking through this entire fight saying, yeah, no one's going to do it, it sort of makes it tough to sell your next fight. So that probably wasn't the smartest thing from a promotional standpoint. They were also saying that it was a flawless performance. I mean, it was obviously a dominant performance, but there were definitely flaws in there as well. Like I mentioned, there was the decision that she made that cost her the ability to get a finish at the end of the fourth round. a lot of times, part of the reason why Spencer was able to hang in there the whole time is that she has a really good chin, and she was taking the shots well. But another part of it is that when she would take a shot, she would oftentimes just cover up, keep her hands up high the entire time, and sort of just circle away. But when you keep your hands all the way up, you are exposing your body, and it really felt like Nunes was leaving a lot of opportunities to go to the body, and it wasn't entirely clear why, especially with the kick. It seemed like there was a gigantic opening for much of the fight to land a rear teep kick into the body. You could have landed a rear round kick as well when she was up against the fence. Like, there were a lot of opportunities to attack the body as Spencer covered up to the head. I'm not entirely sure why Nunes didn't do that. Maybe for her, she felt like if she ducked down with a punch that she might have left an opening for an overhand counter. Maybe if she felt like she threw a kick that she might give Spencer a chance to take her down. I'm not sure what the thought process was there, but it did feel like there were a lot of opportunities to go to the body that Nunes was not taking. But again, when you're dominating as much as she is, why take any risk if you don't have to? So, big win for her. As far as the women's 145 division, I mean, it really wasn't a division heading into this fight. I think one of the interesting thoughts that came to my mind after I did last week's podcast that thankfully I didn't have to bring up this week, or at least not make an interesting story out of it, is had Spencer actually won this fight, you would probably have to reopen that GOAT conversation, because though Cyborg has the loss to Amanda Nunes, assuming that Spencer had beat Nunes, which obviously she didn't, then you would have a situation where Nunes beat Cyborg, Cyborg beat Spencer, but Spencer beat Cyborg, and it's like, well, is Nunes really the GOAT, or did Cyborg earn it back? But obviously, with his dominant performance, that's not the case, and Nunes maintains a strong hold over the GOAT label. So I guess that kind of covers it for that fight. As far as what's next for Spencer, I mean, doesn't really have a division there, so just find some other girl who happens to fight at 145, give her a fight with her, and then I guess that makes her a top contender again if she wins, because who else is in the division? For Spencer, I don't know how much she cuts to make 145. It doesn't look like she's as trim as she possibly could be. Maybe there is a way for her to make 135 and try to insert herself in that division, but it doesn't seem like she's interested in it. So for her, I guess it's just hang around the 145 division for as long as you can. Hope you make some decent money, but it seems like opportunities at 145, especially for someone like Spencer, who has now fought and lost to Nunes, are going to be fairly limited. So if you want to have the best opportunities to make money and to earn the biggest fights, you might have to make the drop to 135, because it's either going to be that or the UFC is going to build a 145 division, but that division's been around a few years and it still just isn't shit. For Nunes, I mean, just keep fighting whoever the top contenders are. I think they were talking about Irene Aldana being one at 135, so maybe that's the fight you take. But for her, it's just pretty much keep winning fights and hope that someone can be interesting enough where people can believe that they have a chance to beat you, and therefore it makes watching that fight worthwhile. Maybe it can lead to more pay-per-view sales, because for her, she's a champion. She makes pay-per-view points. But if you're not selling a lot of pay-per-views, then that's not going to translate to a ton of money. Co-main event on the card. This fight was not the most exciting fight, and then all of a sudden it had one of the most exciting finishes you'll ever see. So it was Cody Garbrandt versus Rafael Assunção. For much of the fight, it looked as though both of them kind of wanted to get into boxing range. Both of them were concerned about what would happen if they did it. Garbrandt obviously is incredibly fast counter punches, really quick with his lead left hook. You saw Assunção keeping his right hand out a lot to be ready to block it whenever it came in. So for Assunção, he was a little bit concerned about getting into boxing range. For Cody's counters, for Cody, he was a little bit concerned about getting into boxing range because Assunção hits really hard. So for much of the fight, they were fighting from kicking range. We saw a lot of kicks from Cody Garbrandt, a lot more than what I'm used to seeing from him. They're being pretty effective too, especially the low calf kick. He was having a lot of success with that. But I think from a statistical standpoint, Assunção might have had a slight edge heading into the end of the second round, but I'm not exactly sure how that would have been scored otherwise. But end of the first round, Garbrandt stands up against the fence, just kind of moves his head around and tries to bait Assunção to throw at him. Assunção didn't really bite. End of the second round, he does it again. This time Assunção does bite, sort of paws out one shot and then tries to catch Cody coming up with a big right hook of his own. But as he's doing that, Cody is also throwing a huge right hook, and his lands flush. Looked as though he was just kind of like winding up for a really hard tennis forehand. Like it was like Roger Federer, like slapping a forehand down the line, and it just connected perfectly. Sent Assunção down to the canvas face first, clearly knocked him out, and Garbrandt gets a big win and a great highlight that looks great in a promo. So I think for him, he's got to be pretty happy about that. As far as what this fight meant, with it being the co-main event when there's arguably a bigger bantamweight fight third on the card, some people felt as though had Cody gotten the win, that the UFC was going to try to push him into a title fight sometime soon. As I just mentioned, with this being a perfect knockout for a promo, well, if that's really what the UFC wants to do, they have what they need right now for it, I guess. I would still like to see Aljamain Sterling get that next shot, but it looks like right now Peter Yan versus Jose Aldo is going to be the title fight in July on Fight Island. And as far as who they're going to put in there next, I would hope that it's not going to be Garbrandt. He is now 1-3 in his last 4 fights, but Assunção is a legit guy to beat. Knocking him out is a legit way to do it. He's got a name. It wouldn't shock me if the UFC went that direction. I hope they don't, but it wouldn't shock me. And for Garbrandt, what you needed to put yourself back in the title picture here was a dominant win. You got it. You got that highlight reel finish. So for him, he's got to be really happy. Now, the fight before that, as I briefly mentioned, was Aljamain Sterling versus Corey Sandhagen. Sterling just rushed Sandhagen, got him up against the fence, was able to get a takedown. They were in a position where Sterling didn't quite have Sandhagen's back up against the fence because Sandhagen had a whizzer, and Sandhagen gave up the whizzer and then just allowed his back to be taken standing, which from a wrestling standpoint, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Oftentimes, you're not going to keep a whizzer on the whole time. Like, you'll let him have both arms behind your back, or you'll let him have full control of your back, but then you'll try to fight the hands and then try to stand up from there or try to escape from there. But unfortunately for him, once he had given up that position, Sterling was able to drag him down on the mat, was able to get his hooks in really quick out of a body triangle, and from there was just hunting for the neck. Wasn't able to catch it initially. Made an adjustment, switched arms, was able to sink it in underneath the neck, got a tight grip on it, got the squeeze, and was able to get the tap, and then right as Sandhagen tapped, he then went out. So great finish for Aljamain Sterling, really dominant finish. You figure with this fight, if one of the two guys had a really dominant win or a dominant finish, that would earn them a title shot. Right after Sterling did that, you're like, okay, Sterling's got the title shot. Good for him. Obviously, with Garbrandt getting the knockout he did, it's not entirely clear what's going to happen next. Sterling deserves the title fight more than Garbrandt does, but Garbrandt's probably going to sell a lot more than Sterling is. So it'll be interesting to see where they go from there. Now, granted, Sterling did get himself a little viral clip after where he's talking to Joe Rogan, and he was telling Peter Yan that he was... he meant to say he's coming for that ass, but he initially said, I'm coming on that ass, which I'm sure you know exactly what that means. So that was a pretty funny clip. So maybe that'll help out his case, but I don't think that accidentally, or maybe not accidentally, saying that you're going to come on your rival's ass is... I don't know if that'll be enough for him to get the title shot, but I think what he did in the octagon and what he's done leading up to this fight should be enough for him to get it. For Sandhagen, tough loss for him, but he's still one of the top guys in the division. It wasn't his night, but he still belongs in there with the top guys in the division, so it'll be interesting to see who they give him next. He already fought at Assunção, so I don't know that giving him a Assunção next is going to make the most sense. I don't even know when a Assunção should be ready again, given how bad that knockout was. But for him, it'll be interesting to see who they put him in there with, but I don't think he's pushed himself that far back in the division. Right now, there are going to be a lot of fights between top contenders, and obviously, anytime two people fight, one person's got to lose. So a lot of people are going to get pushed backwards too, just like Sandhagen was, and I think Sandhagen will be able to recover and work his way back into the title picture. So it sucks for him in that he could have possibly earned himself a title shot with a better performance here, but I don't think he's pushed himself too far out of the title picture either. The fight before that was Neil Magny versus Anthony Rocco Martin. I thought that Martin had done enough in the first 2 rounds to win those rounds narrowly, especially with him controlling on the ground. It's not like they were dominant rounds, but it looked like he had done enough. Third round definitely belonged to Magny, so I thought that there'd be a good chance to be 29-28 Rocco, or possibly 29-28 Magny, depending on what you scored the second round. Surprisingly, 2 of the judges gave all 3 rounds to Magny, which didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And then the other judge gave it 29-28 Magny, so Magny got the win there. Wasn't exactly the most exciting fight. Martin did a pretty good job with his grappling, being able to get Magny down to the ground and have decent control from top. Wasn't ever really able to get him into a dominant position where he could get close to a finish or anything, but was definitely doing what I thought had been enough to win, but obviously that wasn't the case. Fight before that, well, I talked a lot about this, and like I said, I put some money down on Andy Weidland. I thought that the odds here just didn't make a whole lot of sense, that Sean O'Malley was being given quite a bit of hype here that wasn't necessarily warranted. I got to say, there are a few different ways you can watch a fight that sort of change how you view it. You can watch it like you're trying to judge it, where you're trying to count shots. That's a bit of a different experience. You can just watch it where you're watching for fun. Sometimes you watch fights where you're really interested in it from a technical standpoint, so you're trying to like break down the techniques as it happens to the fly. Sometimes you have a favorite fighter who you're watching, and you're just kind of like watching everything through their eyes. This fight was one where I knew exactly what his game plan was. I knew what he had to do. So for me, I wasn't necessarily watching super close from the O'Malley standpoint, as much as I was like, okay, I know what you got to do, Eddie. Like, let's make sure you're doing it. And in a way, that sort of made this fight hard to watch because early on he was doing what he had to do. Like I had said last week, what O'Malley preys on is he preys on opponents who stand straight in front of him and don't move terribly well. He likes guys who stay on the outside that he can land different diverse kicks on. And one of the things I mentioned with Wineland is that Wineland's not a fun guy to kick, especially if you don't set it up. He does a good job at checking kicks, and you're going to hurt your foot pretty bad if you aren't setting your kicks up right with him. And one of the things that O'Malley mentioned after this fight is he's like, yeah, he did land a hard right hand on me, and my foot's pretty sore right now, but outside of that, I feel fine. So there were some kicks that landed pretty well, but for the most part, Wineland was doing his part in checking them and making O'Malley pay for the kicks that he was landing. But for as long as he was keeping his movement going, like, he was fine. Like I mentioned, he did land that really big right hand early on, so it's like, okay, well, things are going well. This is what we need, like, just more of the same, and eventually you're going to find your shot and you'll be able to put him down, so that'll be good. But it was, I think what initially happened, from what I heard from his coach Bob Hemrick, the issue was that there was a body kick that actually kind of stung him and sort of slowed him down. But whatever the case was, like, after taking a body kick, he also got caught with a right hook as O'Malley was leaving the pocket. And sort of at that moment, I could see Wineland stop moving around as much as he had been earlier. And it's like, oh shit, like, you can't stand still in front of this guy. Like, get back to your movement, get back to your movement, get back to your movement. And obviously he was still trying to recover there. Stayed still. O'Malley went for a spinning wheel kick to try to finish him off. Wineland ducked underneath it. But then he was still kind of standing there, still trying to recover. But again, standing still. And then at that point, that's when O'Malley was able to land the big right hand and put him out. So it was just frustrating in that, like, even before the knockout happened, it was kind of like in the back of my head, like, I have alarm bells going off, like, dude, you got to move, you got to move, you got to move. Like, you can't stay in front of him. And real soon after, O'Malley was able to clip him. So, again, credit to O'Malley. That's definitely a good skill set to have, where if a guy stands straight in front of you, that you're able to pick him off, land long shots, land powerful shots, and be able to alter fights that way. So you got to give him his due. Like, there are definitely areas of the fight, areas on the feet, areas in a fight where O'Malley is incredibly dangerous, and he was able to get the fight to those positions and was able to make Wineland pay there. So you got to give him credit for that. For Wineland, it's tough. He got a fine. Like, he's okay now. Obviously disappointed, but it's just one of those frustrating things to watch where you know exactly what the game plan of a fighter is. You're watching them and saying, okay, well, this is what we're supposed to be doing. This is what you're not supposed to be doing. And then when you see them doing what they're not supposed to be seeing what they're not supposed to be doing, being like, okay, come on, like, get back to what you're supposed to be doing here, man, or else this isn't going to end well. And unfortunately, it didn't end well in that case. But credit to O'Malley for Wineland. I'm sure he'll be back at some point soon. I don't know what his plans are. Obviously, with him being a fireman, he has to make sure he gets time off before he takes a fight. So I don't know exactly when he'll be available to take his next fight, but I think for him, he wants to get that fight back and have a better performance to remember himself by. So that was kind of tough. For the prelims, first fight, or the main event of the prelims, was Chase Hooper versus Alex Caceres. Hooper really showing that he's very heavily reliant on his jiu-jitsu in MMA. His striking just has a lot of work that needs to be done on it. Wrestling has a lot of work that needs to be done on it as well. Was able to get the fight to the ground a couple different times, but wasn't all that effective once he got there. So for him, Caceres, or so for Caceres at least, on the feet was able to just piece him up with the jab, landed some nice lead hooks as well, was able to stumble Hooper at times. So for him, he was the better striker heading in. He was able to show that. When he did get put on the ground, was able to stay out of trouble in ways that he wasn't able to do with Chrome Gracie. Obviously, like I mentioned before, Chrome Gracie is a much better grappler than Chase Hooper is, but the idea would be that Chase Hooper would try to take the same game plan. Just because Crone is much better at implementing that game plan doesn't mean that Chase can't implement it too, but Chase was not able to implement it too, and so though he had Caceres' back a few different points standing, he wasn't ever really able to drag him down like Crone was, and for that reason just wasn't able to get to a position where he can get a finish, and on the feet just was way behind for most of the fight. So that's his first professional loss. Kid's 20 years old. As far as where he goes from here, I mean, it looks like there's going to be a lot of time that needs to be put in the striking for him to be competitive with a lot of other guys on the feet in his division. Also, if he grows, he's going to be looking at 155 or even 170, so it's going to be important for him to improve his striking a lot for those divisions. The wrestling, again, that also needs a lot of improvement. Jiu-jitsu is going to keep improving, but for him, it's a little bit concerning. One of the things that you have sometimes is when you have those jiu-jitsu guys who come in and they're able to take everyone down and get the finish, you always kind of wonder, like, when are they going to hit the guy who they have trouble taking down, and what's that going to look like? But before it happens, you can just imagine them just like implementing their game on everyone. But once someone finally stops and you're like, oh, these guys actually have some big problems in their game, you kind of remember that with Chrome Gracie, where after he had the win against Caceres, people are wondering about what's it going to look like with him against a top 15 guy. Like, can he do that to everyone? Can he do that to Max Holloway? Can he win the title? For Mackenzie Dern, a lot of people were talking about her like some kind of title challenger until she was able to run into some girls who were able to stop her from implementing her game. And now for Chase Hooper, it's the same kind of thing, where now that we've seen him being able to take someone down and implement his jiu-jitsu game, you kind of have to wonder, like, all those other holes in the game, they really do need to be addressed for him to work his way to the top of the division. It's going to be interesting to see if he's able to do it. But for him, I probably would recommend taking a little while off between now and his next fight. I don't believe he has college debt. I'm sure if he's responsible with his money, it's not like he needs to fight every 3 months for him to be fine financially. I think for him right now, it's really important to work on developing new skills and really work on that striking, work on that wrestling, and just continue to improve the jiu-jitsu, because the game he has right now at 20 is not a championship level game, and if he ever wants to get to that point, he's got a lot of work to do from between now and then. The fight before that was Ian Heinisch versus Gerald Meerschaert. I thought this fight was going to be taken off because one of Heinisch's cornermen tested positive for COVID, which is sort of a weird thing, especially if you consider COVID, especially for people in this age group, to be like an aggressive flu. Like the thought like 6 months ago of someone having to drop out of a fight because their cornerman got the flu would just be crazy, and it sort of sounded like that was what we were going to have in this case. But fortunately, they were able to get him back on the card. But for him, has a good wrestling background, decent striking, but Meerschaert knew that Heinisch had a good wrestling background. Heinisch was able to duck down and sort of feint that he was going to go for a takedown through the overhand right over the top, a move we've seen a ton from wrestlers in the past. Was very effective, dropped Meerschaert, and then at that point, Heinisch was able to get the TKO finish on the ground. Right before that, we had Cody Stamann versus Brian Kelleher. Pretty dominant through the first 2 rounds for Stamann. Third round, it looked like Kelleher might have done enough to win it. Now, all 3 judges gave it 30-27 to Stamann, but in the end, it's not like it really mattered. Stamann deserved the win. He got the win. It was pretty emotional for him in that he had lost his younger brother prior to this fight a week prior. So for him, he just kind of had to soldier through, get to the fight, and then win that fight. And for him, really emotional. Gets the win. Has a really emotional interview afterwards with Joe Rogan, talking about how much it meant to him and how much his brother meant to him. So glad to see him get the win there. It was pretty nice to see. Fight before that, we had Charles Byrd versus Maki Pitolo. Pitolo was just a better striker in this fight and was just dominating Byrd, getting him up against the fence, landing to the head, to the body. Eventually was able to get him down in the second round and get the finish. Sort of weird how Byrd went to the ground, just kind of off of what looked like a lazy takedown, but at that point he just kind of turtled up and got finished. Afterwards, he had taken his gloves off in the octagon and later announced that he was retiring from MMA with a 10-7 record, being a UFC veteran. On the early prelims, a bit of a weird finish between Alex Perez and Yusei Formiga. So Perez was having a lot of success with the low calf kicks. It's kind of weird how a lot of them were landing, where oftentimes he was landing with the top of the foot, like landing with the big toe. And it looked almost like Perez was going to hurt himself a little bit more than Formiga was from there. But you can definitely tell that Formiga was getting hurt by those low leg kicks. The one that finally finished it looked like just the big toe landed. It was kind of odd because Formiga went down on it, but he was still like looking at him as if, like, had the ref not jumped in and Perez like followed him up and followed it up and tried to like go into his guard, that the fight could have just kept going and it wouldn't have been that big of a deal. I'm sure Formiga was in a lot of pain. He wasn't really protesting the stoppage either, but it looked kind of weird in that Formiga just goes down on the leg kick, and rather than watching to see if Alex Perez was going to go down from there and try to grapple with him or see if Formiga was going to do anything after he landed, it was immediately stopped, which is kind of odd. Usually if someone gets stopped immediately when they fall down from a strike, it's because there's head trauma and they look like they're unconscious. Formiga was obviously not unconscious there. It didn't entirely look like he wanted to like he was done fighting either. Like he was still focused and still was like in a defensive position, but ref had seen enough, and I guess since Formiga wasn't complaining about it, who would I be to complain about it either? But before that was Devin Clark versus Alonzo Menefield. What happened before the fight I'll talk about later on. But in the fight, Clark was very effective with his wrestling, was able to tire out Menefield, and was able to do enough to get the win here. Two of the judges gave it 2 rounds to 1 for Clark. One of them gave all 3 rounds to Clark. And then the first fight on the card, this one I was also really wrong about. Sort of similar situation to what happened in the Aljamain Sterling versus Corey Sandhagen fight, where you have one guy who is able to get the back, and you kind of have this decision for the guy who's getting his back taken, whether standing at least. You have the decision for him whether you keep the whizzer and try to fight it, or whether you give up the whizzer, let him get behind you, and then just try not to get dragged to the mat. That seems to be what Dunham chose to do here. Burns was able to drag him to the mat at that point. Was able to get his hooks in and catch Dunham as Dunham was trying to escape the position. Was able to catch underneath his chin, get the rear naked choke and get the finish. I thought that Dunham would dominate this fight. My reasoning was that I feel like Dunham's a much better striker than Herbert Burns was, at least for what we saw early on. It looked like Dunham was the better striker, but Burns did land a decent shot. But Burns was also very aggressive about getting in close and trying to drag this fight to the ground. Wasn't able to get it to the ground like in a typical wrestling manner where you like shoot underneath for a double leg and drag him to the mat or hit a single leg or anything like that. But he was able to get a go behind, get to the back, drag him to the mat, and then from there get his hooks in and then get the rear naked choke. So very good jiu-jitsu from Herbert Burns. As impressive as the finish was, the fact that Evan Dunham is a long-time black belt and a guy who owns his own Brazilian jiu-jitsu school should make it more impressive than what some might have taken it to be. So got to give him credit there. I'm still not entirely sold on Herbert. Guy does have very good jiu-jitsu, but his striking just isn't great. His wrestling, at least traditionally, isn't great. He was able to get this fight to the ground, so I have to give him credit for finding the way after getting Dunham's back, being able to drag him to the mat. But it sort of feels like a similar situation to what I talked about with Hooper, where he's going to find some guys where he's not able to bring him down to the mat. He's got to strike with him for a little bit while, or at least have enough striking to set up some decent takedown attempts. He's not going to have it, and he's going to get in trouble. But at this point, he's looked really good in his first two fights. Got a knockout of Nate Landwehr, and now has a rear naked choke over Evan Dunham. So both of those are pretty impressive finishes. So that covers it for UFC 250. Next card that we have is going to be UFC Fight Night. Eye versus Calvillo. Main event, Jessica Eye versus Cynthia Calvillo. I mean, well, Calvillo had been at 115. She's moving up to 125. Pretty decent grappling from what we'd seen at 115. Pretty aggressive, likes to move a lot. Pretty aggressive from top, looks to look for chokes when she gets to the ground. So I would imagine that's going to be her game plan here. Eye's a pretty solid grappler herself, so I don't know that Calvillo is going to be super successful at that. Eye should be the better striker, so I'd imagine that Eye is going to win this fight mostly on the feet. But either way, if Jessica Eye wins, does she get herself back in the title picture after as bad as that knockout loss was to Shevchenko? I don't know that I see that. Maybe because, I mean, if Shevchenko's going to take a title fight at 125, you have to put someone in there, so who's got a better case than Eye if she gets this win? I don't know. For Cynthia Calvillo, does a win over Eye put her in the title picture? Maybe. If you look at where Eye's ranked, maybe you could say that a win over her puts Calvillo in a top ranking in the division. She's someone who was identified as a future star a while back. That obviously hasn't come to fruition, but if she gets a win here, then maybe the idea is, well, maybe back then she wasn't ready, but maybe she's ready now, and they try to put her into a title fight. I don't see her being competitive with Shevchenko, but maybe that's something that they look to do. But I guess that's all I have for this main event. That probably should be like on an early prelim of like any other card. But you know what? We still get, what do we get? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We get 10 fights, so I can't complain about that. Fight number 2, or I guess fight number 9 if you're going the opposite direction, would be Carl Roberson versus Marvin Vettori. Vettori was looking to get a fight a little while back at UFC 249. His opponent dropped out, so at least here he's able to get back in there pretty quickly. Roberson should be a pretty tough matchup for him, so that'll be a fun fight. Then we have a really interesting fight with Ray Borg coming back after recently losing to Ricky Simone. He'll be fighting Merab Dvalishvili, so it'll be interesting to see Merab fight again. He's one of those guys where from a skill standpoint you hear a lot of good things about him, especially from his training partners like Aljamain Sterling. He's had some pretty good performances in the octagon. He's also had some losses, like the one to Ricky Simone, that were a little bit surprising to some. I would imagine he's probably going to get the win here with Ray Borg, but that's going to be a pretty fun fight as well. Interesting to see that there are, it seems like there's two different types of fighters here that you're noticing a lot. You're either noticing the guys who are refusing to fight and asking for more money, and then you have guys like Ray Borg who are just fighting every chance they can get right now. So it's interesting to see that Borg's going to be back this quickly. The fight before that is going to be Andre Fili versus Charles Jourdain. That should be a pretty fun fight, even though the names might not be the biggest. And then we got Jordan Espinoza versus Mark De La Rosa, which should be a fun flyweight fight. On the prelims, it's going to be Maria Agapova versus Melissa Gatto. Don't know much about either of them. Charles Rosa, another fighter who's coming back off of a loss really quickly. He had that loss to Bryce Mitchell. He's coming back already. He'll be fighting Kevin Aguilar. Aguilar has been very successful in the regional scene. Has looked okay in his first couple fights in the UFC. It'll be interesting to see how he looks here against Charles Rosa. We got Julia Avila versus Gina Mazzani, Ryan Benoit versus Tyson Nam, and Jordan Griffin versus Derek Minner. So that covers it for those fights. As I had just mentioned, there are fighters that are along the lines of Charles Rosa or Ray Borg who are looking to fight as much as possible. And then you have other fighters who are not necessarily looking to fight as much as possible. So that's your Jorge Masvidal, Jon Jones, Conor McGregor, and Sean O'Malley. So I guess I'll just mention what each of their individual situations are and then just talk about it in the whole. O'Malley's a different situation, so I guess I'll go to him. Well, I'll go to him last because he's a smaller name. But for Jorge, he is looking for a lot more money in his next fight. His concern seems to be that the money he made in the Nate Diaz fight is double what he's being offered right now. He doesn't think that that's fair, and he doesn't want to take less to fight in his next fight, especially if it's for a title. To that end, as I've mentioned a million times, and I feel like I have to keep mentioning it again, what you make in MMA is based largely around what you're able to draw. So, especially if you have pay-per-view points, which I think Masvidal probably got pay-per-view points on that Nate Diaz fight, and I'd imagine that he'd be able to negotiate for that in this fight too against Usman. If you have a fight that, like if you star in a main event and that main event brings in $100 million in revenue, then you start another main event and that main event brings in $50 million in revenue, you shouldn't get paid as much for the $50 million one as you do for the $100 million one. So if Masvidal thinks that he's going to be able to sell a similar amount, or he's going to be able to bring in a similar amount of revenue for his next fight that he will for the Diaz fight, and he's going to get paid half, then he's right to be upset. If he thinks that they're going to make a lot less money in the next fight and he's going to get paid half, like, what exactly do you want? Like, what? Especially if you're getting the title fight, like, the championship contracts have a lot of nice things in there for the fighters. So if you want to get that championship contract, you kind of have to take the fight in the meantime. But if you are the star that you think you are, like, you're probably still going to sell a lot of pay-per-views for this fight with Usman. If you do enough promotion, it's not as though he doesn't enjoy doing promotion. He does a lot of work with Dan Le Batard. He'll go out and do interviews with a lot of other places as well. So it's not as though Masvidal is unwilling to promote it. So if he does have a deal in place where he's going to get a percentage of the pay-per-view against Usman or whoever he fights next, and he's confident that he's the star that he thinks he is, and he's going to be able to sell as much as he thinks he's going to sell, he's probably not going to be making half of what he made against Diaz. He'll probably be making a similar amount, and if he sells more than he did against Diaz, if that fight brings in more money than it did, now granted, if they're not having a gate, then that's going to make it tough. But if they do bring in more money, then chances are he's going to make something similar to what he had against Diaz, so I don't know what the concern is. It seems like what is coming out of his side, though, is saying that they don't think they're going to bring in anywhere near the money that they brought in against Diaz, but they want to make a similar amount of money regardless. To that end, is he being reasonable? Can't say that he is. For Jon Jones, I already brought this up in previous weeks, but for him, he's talking about moving up to fight Francis Ngannou and wants to be paid extra because he's taking on an extra challenge against Ngannou. Again, if this fight is, Jon Jones is the champion, he gets pay-per-view points. If this fight's going to sell a lot more on pay-per-view than other fights, then guess what? You're going to get paid more. Like, you already got a good deal. And plus, from what he was saying, it sounds as though the UFC was looking to offer more in pay-per-view money anyway. So, not sure what he's upset about there. Also, it's interesting that he recently took that fight with Dominic Reyes that didn't exactly sell a ton. Like, if you take a fight against Blachowicz, are you willing to fight on the same deal that you fought on against Reyes? You are signed under a deal right now. Or is he just, like, using this Ngannou excuse to, like, try to completely renegotiate everything? Seems like it's the second option there, which is sort of odd. For Conor McGregor, he never really said specifically what he wants. He did have an interview with Helwani after he supposedly retired, where he was talking about how he wants to fight Justin Gaethje in July, and the fact that the UFC isn't moving on that is frustrating him. Again, if he's content with his career in MMA, it'd be odd for him to then come up and say, hey, I want to fight in July. So obviously this retirement is not one that's to be believed. But for him, it's not entirely clear if this is a money thing for him or if this is him just trying to push the UFC's hand. I mean, if the UFC is like, okay, fine, you're retired, then you got to pull out of the USADA pool and make it official. But then it'll take 6 months to get back in. We'll see if Conor bites on that. But with him, it's not entirely clear what he's looking for. The UFC generally has good deals for him, and he makes a lot in pay-per-view points, and he sells a lot, so that always ends up being good money for him. So I'm not sure exactly if he wants more money or what his issue is, or if it's more just that he's like trying to get a fight offered more so than trying to get a certain pay offered. But it's not entirely clear what's going on there, but that's where he's coming from. For Sugar Sean O'Malley, he was fighting on a contract of 40-40 for his last fight, and then got the $50,000 for the bonus for the knockout of the night as well. For him, he feels like he brings in a lot of attention that goes well beyond what he's making right now, and that he should renegotiate. I think, given how MMA pay works, he's probably right. I think it does seem that he has a following that goes outside of a lot of other fighters, that there are a lot of people who will go out of their way to tune in for him. I'm not exactly sure what the metrics show on that, at least in terms of people buying pay-per-views. He was officially on a pay-per-view this time. I'm not entirely sure what the bumps are for him when he's on cable versus when he's on pay-per-view. There are a few different ways that you can be a value as a fighter. You can be a value because you sell more tickets, so you bring in more money at the gate. You can be a value where you sell more pay-per-views, so you're obviously bringing value that way. And you can also be a value where a lot of people just want to tune in and watch you on free TV, and those ratings also have a value to them as well. Oftentimes, if you're one, you're often all of them, but that's not always the case. There might be some people who have a fan base that is like very localized. So if they fight in a certain market, they're going to be able to sell a ton of tickets, but won't necessarily translate to a ton of pay-per-view buys. But that's still valuable. You might have people who are interesting enough for people to want to tune in to on free TV, but maybe not enough for them to want to actually like shell out the money and pay for a fight. So it'll be interesting to see with O'Malley where exactly he fits into that. But I do have a feeling, given the following that he has, that he probably is worth a little bit more than 40-40. And it wouldn't surprise me if the UFC is willing to work with him on that. To that end, there's a lot of talk about fighters forming a union, and with all four of these guys talking about their pay right now at the same time, there are some people who are like, hey, this is actually a good point. This is why the UFC needs a union. If this is what you are arguing right now, you're kind of showing that you don't really know much about how unions work in other sports. So I'll talk about Sean O'Malley first because it's just one example, and I'll get to the other three next. In Sean O'Malley's case, let me put it this way. So think of the NFL. Sean O'Malley is in a situation right now where he's on a fairly new contract. I think it's like 4-0 in the UFC, 3-0 in the UFC, something like that. Not ranked yet. He might be ranked when the rankings come out on Tuesday, but not ranked yet in his division. So given that, given where he's ranked and given what he's paid, it's not necessarily out of line. But in contracts like the NFL or other union sports, pay isn't really based around what you're able to draw in or how many tickets you're going to be able to sell for your team. It's based around how good you actually are in the sport. When you have contracts that go to arbitration, they don't talk about how many tickets the guys sell. They'll talk about how their stats compare to other players and what those other players are making under their contracts. So it's a lot more, I guess, merit/athletic based. So let's take an example. Let's just say that I own the Jacksonville Jaguars and we're having trouble selling tickets in the 2020 season or 2021. Let's just say COVID's not a part of this. And I decide, you know what, like we're having trouble selling tickets right now. I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to bring in a famous backup quarterback, and I'm going to bring in, say, Tim Tebow or Johnny Manziel, or let's go Tebow because they're in Florida. We're going to bring in Tim Tebow. Let's just say that they weren't selling out all their tickets, that they had like maybe 10,000 extra seats that they could sell every game that they're not selling out. People aren't tuning into their games. They're having trouble getting corporate partnerships. All of a sudden, you bring in Tebow. Chances are under the UFC or under the NFL union, like Tebow's probably going to be making like the minimum salary he can make for someone his age is probably going to be like $1 million or less. Even though bringing in Tebow might be able to sell out those extra 10,000 seats every game, even though bringing him in is going to be able to get a lot more eyes on it, make the corporate partnerships more worthwhile. Even with all that, because of how the union is organized, a guy like Tim Tebow is not going to be making like $15 million or making close to what he's actually worth, given the attention he brings, because that's not how the CBA is designed in these sports. So for someone like Sean O'Malley, where he's in the situation where at least what he does in the octagon, or at least what he does on the field, doesn't yet warrant big money. He may get to a point where it does, depending on who he's able to beat and how far he's able to climb up in that bantamweight division. In MMA, because it's based off of what you can sell, he's likely going to be able to renegotiate his contract and get some really good money because of that. Whereas in a sport like football, if you're Tim Tebow or you're like a famous backup quarterback, but you're really not putting up great stats on the field, you're not going to get paid what you're necessarily worth as a market asset. So for O'Malley, he's going to be in a better position because the UFC doesn't have a union similar to the NFL than he would be if there was. On the other end of the spectrum, you have the Conor McGregors, you have the Jorge Masvidals, the Jon Jones, the guys who are the big stars. Again, in the NFL, and actually there's a couple things to. So first off, in all these other union sports, if you're under a contract, you have to play out your contract. There are some cases where you might want to hold out, and the team might decide, okay, you know what, fine, we'll give in and we'll give you a new contract. Sometimes it happens. We saw it happen with Julio Jones. Sometimes it doesn't. So the guys either have to sit out or they just don't play. So like we had Le'Veon Bell sit out an entire season for the Pittsburgh Steelers recently. Sometimes the players just have to play and they're disgruntled, and then once their contract ends, they go somewhere else. In all these cases, Jones Masvidal, Conor, they're all under contracts right now. If it's in another union sport, whatever they sign to, you got to play under that. Like, you got to play for whatever you have, whatever you've already agreed to. Like, you can't just constantly renegotiate every 6 months or every year, which is something they're trying to do. So again, if you're trying to get this into like a union situation, then whatever deal you signed 3 years ago, if you're still under it, like, you got to keep fighting under it. Like, that just is what it is. Is that beneficial to them? Is that what would be best for them right now? No, it really isn't. Also, if you're a superstar in a team sport, chances are the union's fucking you. You're probably worth a lot more than what you're making, but the union isn't designed for superstars. The union is designed more for like the lower level guys, and more designed to help them out. So, for example, if you're Sidney Crosby and you're making like $10 million or $12 million, on average $8.7 million over the course of your contract, your value to the Pittsburgh Penguins in terms of what you sell, in terms of the playoff games you're able to get the team into just based off how well you play. There are plenty of other corporate partnerships that are involved with him, especially, or that are involved as a result of how well the team plays because of what he does on the ice. He's worth a lot more than $8.7 million a year to the Pittsburgh Penguins. He's worth a lot more than $12 million a year to the Pittsburgh Penguins. But there are max contracts under the union, so he can only sign for the max or less, and that's where he's at. Same with Connor McDavid. He can only sign for the max or less with the Edmonton Oilers. Same thing with basketball. LeBron James is worth a ton to the Lakers. They're making a lot. They were making a lot more money prior to COVID, at least. Now that he's around, than they were when they were missing the playoffs the last few years before then. With that being said, LeBron James is limited by the max deal. He's definitely worth more than that to that franchise. So, if you are the outlier at the top of your sport, chances are you deserve, or at least you earn the company, the team, the league. You earn it more money than what you're getting, a lot more than what you're getting paid. And because of the limits within the union deal, you're not going to get paid as much as you're worth. So Conor McGregor is not going to get as much money as Conor McGregor makes right now if the UFC becomes a union sport. Same for Jones, same for Jorge Masvidal. Like, unions are not designed to benefit the top outliers. They're more designed to benefit the middle guys and the lower guys. So in all these cases, if you think that a union is going to be what's going to fix things for them, just take a look at how unions are affecting other sports, and I have a feeling that if you really put in the time and research, you're going to realize that that would not necessarily be all that helpful for any of these guys. As far as fights to announce, there's a bunch of good ones. So there's going to be the return of Alexander Gustafsson coming up at heavyweight, not light heavyweight. He'll be fighting Fabricio Verdum. Seems like a terrible fight for Verdum. Verdum looked really bad against Oleinik, even on the feet. I would imagine that Verdum's going to have trouble taking this fight to the ground, and for as long as it stays in boxing range, Gustafsson is just going to chew him up. We've got Mickey Gall versus Mike Perry. Yeah, this is not going to be a great one for Gall. Gall is not the best striker. Not that Perry is like a technical wizard on the feet either, but he's a tough guy to deal with. That you have to be incredibly technical to be able to beat him on the feet, and that is not Mickey Gall. So I would imagine that Perry's probably going to knock him out and give him a lot of trouble. See Gall having trouble taking him down. Gall's wrestling isn't all that great in the first place, and even if he does get him to the ground, though Gall has the better jiu-jitsu, Perry's competent on the ground. So looks like it'll be a tough one for Mickey. We've got another fight between Shogun Rua and Minotauro Nogueira. I guess if these guys are going to fight, might as well have them fight each other. This is sort of like a Legends division type of thing right here, but you'd have to pick Shogun to get the win there. We've got Carla Esparza versus Marina Rodriguez. Marina looked really good in her past few fights. I kind of wanted to see her stay a little bit more active, but at least we'll be able to get to see her back again against Esparza. Esparza's looking pretty good in the 115 division right now, so if Rodriguez can get a win here, she might be able to find herself in the title picture really soon. I think she's a very interesting matchup for Zhang Weili, so we'll see how this fight goes. And if she's able to keep Esparza off her and keep it on the feet. Did very well against Tisha Torres, but Esparza should be a better wrestler for her to have to deal with. In that division, we also have a rematch between Rose Namajunas and Jessica Andrade, and we also have a fight at middleweight between Jack Hermanson and Kelvin Gastelum. So that covers it for most of the MMA stuff. I have some more political stuff that I'm keeping towards the end, so if you want to skip that, you can skip it. But I'll bring that up later. For Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, there was an event called Who's Number One. There were 4 main matches on it. The main event was between Gordon Ryan and Kyle Bain. It was a no time limit submission only match. Started off on the feet, wasn't a whole lot going on. Eventually got to the ground, where Gordon Ryan was able to fight off I don't know if I would call it great leg attack attempt, but Kyle Bain, it was interesting to see him try to go leg attack for leg attack with Gordon Ryan. It was nice to see that he was brave enough to do that, but it didn't necessarily work for him. But after losing a position going for it, Ryan attempted to take his back, and then in that scramble, Ryan ends up snatching her arm, having both legs over for the armbar, then adjusting the legs to then switch into a triangle position, and then had sort of like this odd triangle armbar position where it wasn't like a straight armbar, but it was more kind of like mechanically similar to a mirror lock, and how he was able to twist. He was able to twist Calvillo's arm, pop the arm, got the win, and I guess obviously remains number one. We had a very interesting match between Tai Ruotolo and Nicky Ryan. Man, Tai Ruotolo looked really good here. I believe he had a loss to Ethan Crelinsten, who was in the match before that. That I'll get to, like a year and a half ago. So he's obviously made a lot of adjustments to his no-gi game. It was really interesting in that we had a couple matchups between the Danaher Death Squad and Atos. Given that those are two of the main teams that you have in MMA or in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu right now, Atos oftentimes wins the team titles at the Gi Worlds, and the Danaher Death Squad has done really well at a lot of the no-gi events, especially ADCC, and had been doing a lot of EBI prior to EBI switching over to Combat Jiu-Jitsu, and now I'm not entirely sure what they're doing. But Tai Ruotolo really stayed out of danger for the most part in terms of Nicky Ryan's leg lock games. His passing was fantastic. He's very good at passing from the outside. Was doing a great job doing his typical thing where he'll kind of underneath his instep, like he'll step on top of like on top of your shin, like right above your ankle, and then sort of like swing your leg side to side, and then find a way to get a pass. Was able to pass Nicky Ryan's guard a couple of times. Just overall dominated the match. Wasn't super close to finishing him at any point, but just clearly outplayed him the entire time. Was able to get the win. There was also a match between Cade Ruotolo, Ty's twin brother, and Ethan Crelinsten, who was an ADCC qualifier champion. That was back in 2017. Was injured this time around, so he didn't compete in 2019. But he's a guy who's trying to work his way up. He trains out of TriStar and also trains with the Danaher Death Squad. But it looked like he was doing enough to win this match. Now, there's a weird rule set that they have now with Fight to Win where they give like 5 points for a very close submission attempt, and then like 1 point for like a weak submission attempt, and like 1 point for like certain positions as well. So it's very heavily based on getting close to submitting guys, and I guess the judges felt as though Ruotolo had a couple close submissions throughout the match, but the best positions were definitely the positions that Crelinsten had. He was able to mount Ruotolo twice, but in the end, Ruotolo was able to get the win there. And then the other match that was interesting was Alec Balding versus Cody Steele. This one was a really good back and forth match. Went to split decision, and Cody Steele was able to get the win there. The other interesting jiu-jitsu event that happened was going on Saturday. I haven't had a chance to watch it yet because it was going on during the UFC, but I've got the results right now. But they had what was called a 180-pound gi kumite. So in the opening round, Pedro Moreno and William Tackett had a match. Moreno got the win by a score of 11-0, which is definitely a match I want to see. Tackett's looked fantastic in a lot of the tournaments we've seen him in. I think he's a brown belt now. He was a purple belt like a year ago. But he's done really well against some other black belts, so it's going to be interesting to see how Moreno was able to just put it on him and win by a score of 11-0. Roberto Jimenez was able to beat Manuel Ribamar by armbar. Gabriel Argis got a rear naked choke on Jake Watson, and Gustavo Batista beat Jaime Canuto by ref's decision in OT. In the semis, Jimenez was able to beat Moreno by armbar. I believe those two had a match at the No-Gi Worlds for the Brown Belt World Championship back in December. I know for sure Jimenez is a black belt now. I think Moreno also got promoted to black belt as well. So it's interesting to see them there in the semis. And then Gustavo Batista and Gabriel Argis had a match, and Batista was able to pass Argis' guard in overtime to get the win there. So 2-0 in overtime for Gustavo Batista. They go to the finals, and Gustavo Batista again goes to overtime and again gets a win by guard pass in overtime, this time against Roberto Jimenez. So he wins the Third Coast Grappling Kumite. All right, back to MMA. There's the Devin Clark situation. So as Bruce Buffer was calling Devin Clark's name, Devin Clark was kneeling in the octagon and also raised his fist. So first off, in terms of where I stood on Colin Kaepernick, I wasn't a very big fan of Kaepernick doing the kneeling thing. My reasoning, there are a few different reasons. For one, he was doing it during the national anthem. The national anthem is obviously a patriotic time. It's a time that represents America, and for a lot of people, even if there are disagreements, whether it's political or whether it's ideological, like as Americans, it's something that you can all kind of like get along to and see as a unifying thing. So to protest during what's supposed to be a unifying moment, I wasn't really a fan of. Comparing that to this, Bruce Buffer calling your name is not a unifying moment, so you don't have that in there. Also, he's doing it in uniform as part of a team sport. So if you're a 49ers fan and you don't necessarily agree with him, you're kind of stuck in the situation where you're like kind of like gritting your teeth and like, God, I like my 49ers, but now I kind of like don't know who to cheer for because I don't like what our quarterback's doing. So there's sort of that that situation as well, where he's doing it at work. Now, granted, Clark is also doing it at work, but I think what makes it a little bit different is that in MMA, this isn't a team sport. In MMA, you want fans to care about you, whether they like you or whether they hate you. So in that way, it's sort of similar to pro wrestling, and in that way, I actually kind of think that taking political stances in MMA, though it can be annoying at times, if you're like a middling fighter, or if you're trying to like build a name for yourself and like no one cares about you, like tying yourself to something political is not a bad idea. And we saw that with Colby Covington, for example. And now obviously Colby had the skills to back it up, and he made his way to an interim title fight that he won, got himself a belt, and was very close to beating Kamaru Usman before he had lost that fight as well. So he definitely has the skill set to build a name for himself as well. But he absolutely tied himself to a political movement and was able to do that to gain a lot of notoriety. And so the difference between Colby Covington doing what he did with Donald Trump and like making himself like the Trump superfan versus what Devin Clark's doing by kneeling in the octagon, I'm not sure I see a major difference there. So while I'm not a fan at all of what Colin Kaepernick did, honestly, I'm really not, like, I really don't mind Devin Clark doing what he was doing either. I guess when that video came up, it was put on Twitter, and I put up a response to it. I was like, it was sort of like a snarky political response on my part, where it's like, this is kind of ironic that you have a guy who's like kneeling. I don't even remember exactly what I said it, but I was like, there's something kind of ironic about this, where he's kneeling, and then he went on to proceed to beat up a black man in Alonzo Menefield, which was then kind of poetic, given that a lot of like the Black Lives Matter stuff is talking about like these outlier situations where a cop just goes way over the line and just kills someone in cold blood. A lot of that's what it's based around, but you don't really hear those same activists like going nuts whenever there's like 80 people shot in a weekend in Chicago. So it's kind of like this idea of like, well, it's kind of funny that like there's that kneeling, which is like him being upset about police brutality, but then he goes on to beat a black guy. It's sort of like how Black Lives Matter makes a big deal out of those odd situations that happen when cops overstep their boundaries, but seems to be quiet when there's black on black crime that happens like on a daily basis. So I guess that's one way to look at it. But again, if you just like saw that tweet, you'd probably think that I was like against what he was doing. Politically speaking, like, do I think that kneeling is all that useful? No. Did he solve racism by doing it? No. Is he bringing attention to something that people weren't aware of before? If those people are out there that had no idea what was going on, and it took them seeing Devin Clark kneeling for them to like realize what's going on, I'd like to meet those people. I don't know that it's really going to be all that beneficial. It's going to solve any problems, but again, for him, Devin Clark's been around the UFC for a little while. He's had some interesting fights. He had that fight with Jan Blachowicz, where he had a chance to fight against one of the better contenders in the division. So he's been around for a while. It's not as though he's really built a name for himself. So if he's going to build a name for himself, hitching himself to a political movement, didn't have a problem when Colby did it on the right. Can't say that I have a big problem with him doing it on the left, especially if he's not doing it against like some sort of unifying message. And Bruce Buffer calling your name is not unifying. So honestly, don't have a big issue with it. Final topic to talk about is a couple companies that are getting themselves in hot water. So I'll start with Scrap Life in the wrestling community. So Scrap Life, they make wrestling shoes. They also make wrestling apparel. Have a handful of really good guys. I believe they have Bo Nickel. And when I say have, I'm not sure if some of the guys I'm about to name are guys who recently cut ties with them or not. But they had Anthony Ashnault. I know he cut ties with them. Seth Gross, I'm not sure if he cut ties or not. But they had a handful of other just D1 national champions and other guys who were doing really well on the international scene. But what had happened was one of their co-founders, who had access to their Facebook page, obviously, put up a post on Facebook that I think he meant to put on his personal page, but he was still logged into the Scrap Life account. And that post was pretty much just saying, like, he doesn't agree with the Black Lives Matter movement at all. That he's just saying, like, the crime statistics they just aren't consistent with what a lot of the movement says. That you have to look at how many instances there are of like black on white crime, black on black crime, white on white crime, but that the focus on police is completely misguided, and they're making a racial issue where there shouldn't be one. And given this time right now on social media, where like everyone's scared to say anything other than like, oh yes, that's true, I as a white man believe everything that the BLM movement says, and I am going to be quiet, and I'm going to post a black square on my Instagram account to show my solidarity. Like, in that kind of world, bringing up a message where you're like running through a bunch of crime statistics and saying actually like things aren't the way that you portray them to be. Obviously, if you're not agreeing with them, but then like not only not agreeing, but then like saying here's why I disagree, like you're going to draw ire of people. So there were a lot of people who were not terribly happy that came on the Scrap Life account. Now Scrap Life terminated that co-founder, they cut him off the company because of all the public backlash. But that being said, a lot of the athletes ended up leaving the company. There was a lot of negative attention drawn towards them. Given how difficult it is to be an apparel business really in any sport, I mean, obviously back when the UFC didn't have the Reebok deal and we would see t-shirt companies come and go all the time, like you'd see how tough that business is. In some ways in other sports, there are similarities there as well. Scrap Life was a little bit more solidified than maybe some of those companies like Iron Star or Silver Star were, but it seems like having something like this happen is going to be very difficult for them to come back from, so I'm not sure if they will be able to. A lot of the athletes are not terribly happy with it, and even if you as an athlete agree or like don't have an issue with what the founder said, there's going to be a lot of PR pressure on you not to sign with them moving forward. So it'll be interesting to see how they're able to develop a group of sponsored athletes and be able to utilize them to sell their stuff. So for them, it's possible that could be enough to put their company under, but it'll take time to see where things go from there. The other one that was a similar situation, although also different, was with the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu tournament called Grappling Games. So in this case, there was absolutely nothing posted to a Grappling Games account regarding the protest or anything like that. So the Grappling Games is owned and run by a woman named Amy Gonzalez. Her husband also works for the company, but isn't like I guess technically, if they're married, he may technically be a co-owner, but at least in terms of how it's run, like it's primarily her thing. But he posted to his Facebook sort of a similar type of thing where he's like, based off of these statistics, like these arguments that Black Lives Matter is making just don't make sense. They're inconsistent. Also, if we were to try to use the same argument that they use, but then replace the word black with white, it'd be crazy to see how that works out. And a black belt in the Chicago area named Aaron Brooks didn't really necessarily want to argue with him, but it was more just like, dude, this is racist as hell, was like tagging his wife in there, like, do you agree with this? Is this what Grappling Game stands for? And the guy's like, dude, like, fuck off. Like, if you want to argue with me, then we can argue, but otherwise you're just like virtue signaling, you're being annoying as fuck. And so Aaron Brooks, the Chicago black belt was just like recording everything, and then decided that after like trying to get in contact with Amy and not getting an answer that he felt was sufficient, he decided to like post all the screenshots and be like, oh my god, look at how racist Grappling Games is, I'm not going to support them ever again, and was trying to convince a bunch of people to do the same. And there were a lot of people who were responding to him that are fairly big in the Chicago grappling scene who were like, wow, this is interesting to see, like I guess I'm no longer going to compete there, and I'm going to make sure that my teammates don't compete there either. So again, it'll be interesting to see. Now for Grappling Games, Chicago's one of the bigger markets. They do have other markets. They have Texas, they have Nashville as well. So for them, if Chicago is no longer profitable, they might have to just find a new market to make up that difference in. They would also hope that if there's any backlash in Chicago, that doesn't spread to their other markets as well. In that case, I'm not sure exactly how I'm going to handle this myself, because I actually really like Grappling Games. I think that as a company that they're very valuable. For Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu athletes, like you have like the IBJJF, which is like the main tournament, but the IBJJF isn't exactly run in a customer-friendly manner. Like they charge more than any other tournament. If you lose your first match, they're like, you're done for the day. Like they're not trying to give you as many matches as possible. If you have an argument with the ref, they're not going to try to solve it. They're just like, whatever the ref says goes. They just really aren't customer friendly. They just kind of like herd you in like cattle, get you done with the day, and then that's it. Where some of the smaller tournaments, Grappling Games especially, is a lot more customer friendly. If you pay for a division, you're paying a lot less than what you pay for what you would pay to get into the IBJJF. You're guaranteed at least 2 matches. If there ever are any arguments, they try their best just to make sure that things are done right, rather than just like automatically saying, okay, well the ref said so tough luck, better luck next time. They give you time between when you weigh in and when you have to compete. Like it just feels like they do what they can to be better to the grappler itself. So like having them in the jiu-jitsu scene is beneficial, especially in the Chicago jiu-jitsu scene. Taking them out of the jiu-jitsu scene is not going to benefit Chicago grapplers in any way. Taking them out of the scene is not going to fix race relations in any way. So there's no benefit to them getting blackballed. It hurts the jiu-jitsu community as a whole. And even if you think that they should be blackballed, and I definitely don't, but even if you did, like it's not going to solve anything. And also, like if you think this idea of like blackballing people is going to get them to go onto your side, you're completely mistaken. Like this idea, let's just say that Grappling Games has to shut down because of this. Like let's just say that the loss that they have from the Chicago market just puts them under. Like, do you think that the guy who put up those tweets or put up those posts talking about crime statistics is all of a sudden going to be like, you know what, actually now I'm going to go read some Ta-Nehisi Coates and really understand what the other side is saying. And you know what, actually they're completely right. I'm going I'm going to work for the NAACP for the rest of my life, and I'm going to make sure that black people get justice. Like, is that what you think is going to happen? No. Like, if anything, he's just going to be even harder, just have even stronger beliefs in what he already believes in, and go even more out of his way to make sure that his beliefs are the beliefs of others, and try to convince other people and try to make changes in the world that reflect his beliefs. So if your goal is actually to change people's hearts and minds, this is not what you do. This is what you do when you just want to get a pat on the back from people who think just like you. Get a pat on the back from your own community. There's a reason why the phrase virtue signaling is as popular as it is, and that's exactly what Aaron Brooks did here. So we'll see how much attention this draws in. At this point, it was a Facebook post that he put up today, and it's been shared a handful of times. We'll see if Grappling Games has trouble the next time they come to Chicago in terms of actually bringing in people and getting competitors. So hopefully they're not in any trouble here. I think Grappling Games is a great company. I think we need more companies like them that are trying new things in the jiu-jitsu world, that are trying to win over customers by offering them more value than other places. It's tough when you have the IBJJF that isn't going out of their way to offer the most value. So it's nice when you have competitors who are trying to find ways to be more competitor friendly. So I'd like to see him stuck around, especially when you have. I mean, first off, I don't even think that the statements were all that inflammatory, especially if you think about what a lot of like mainstream conservatives think. It's kind of crazy to me that you have this idea where everyone wants to have a conversation, except when someone you don't agree with starts spreading their point of view, then all of a sudden you don't want the conversation, you want them to shut up and listen. That's not exactly how conversations work. You saw that with Drew Brees, where Drew Brees gave his thoughts on the value of the anthem and why he doesn't ever want to kneel during the anthem and why he finds it to be disrespectful. And rather than being like, okay, well, that's your take, let's talk about it, everyone was just like, dude, shut the fuck up, you just don't understand. You need to be quiet, you need to listen to us. Like, that's not how conversations work. If you want to have a conversation, you have to listen to what other people say, understand it, and then be willing to interact with those points. And maybe they teach you something, maybe you can teach them something. But that wasn't the case here with Grappling Games. It wasn't the case with Drew Brees either. And so if your goal is actually to make things better, you have to actually have a conversation. Don't talk about having conversations. Conversation doesn't mean that if you're white, you either say nothing or you just repeat whatever the Black Lives Matter activists tell you to say. Like, a conversation means saying what you believe, and then really having those arguments go head to head and letting the best argument win. And if both sides have to make some changes to adjust to what they feel is true and consistent, then perfect. That's really where you want to be. But this idea of let's have a conversation, you have a conversation by saying something they don't agree with, and then being like, shut the fuck up, stop talking, I want to get you canceled, I want to get you fired, I want to get your business put out and make it so that you can't earn any money anymore. That's not the way to go about things. It's not going to make the world any better. I hope that for the people in the jiu-jitsu community who are just like, yeah, it's racist, Grappling Games is racist, I hope that the people who are told that at least take the time to actually read what was said, realize that it isn't, and still support the company. But again, jiu-jitsu tournaments as a whole are in a tough spot right now anyway. We're finally seeing some places come back in terms of training, but once training resumes in full capacity, it's going to take some time for people to get back into competitive shape. For a lot of these tournaments, they rely heavily on the kids and on the lower belts, and those are usually the last people back in the gym. So it's going to be a tough road back regardless for these jiu-jitsu tournaments, but it doesn't help Grappling Games that on top of the COVID complications, they're also going to have to deal with some really stupid PR crap that's coming up in Chicago. So we'll see where that goes. If there are any updates on that, I'm sure I'll bring it up as it comes. But Grappling Games is definitely a tournament I appreciate a lot. It's a tournament I've competed at a handful of times. I've worked for them a little bit. Haven't done any reffing for them in the past. I might be doing some soon, assuming they come back. But it just feels stupid that they're getting buried for something that someone who works there said online. And it really, that comes to a bigger problem too. Like, if people aren't allowed to express their opinions online for fear of them getting fired from a job if they don't own their business, or from having their business get put into the ground, if they do own the business, that's not how you have conversation. That's not how you have healthy dialogue. That's exactly what cancel culture is, and it's a bad way to go about things. It's not how you win people over. It's not how you make things any better. So hopefully the people involved are going to realize their errors and their mistakes, and everything will get fixed. But to me, that's one that hits home, and I just think it's ridiculous. So that covers it for this week. Obviously, next week I'll be talking about what happened at the UFC Eye versus Calvillo event, and then previewing the upcoming events after that. There may be some updates as well in terms of Grappling Games and even scrap play stuff. If that comes up, I'll bring those up as well. And I'm sure new fights will be announced. Fight Island is probably going to be announced in terms of their actual location. Word on the street right now, so that's going to be somewhere. I think it's near Abu Dhabi. I think it's somewhere in that area right now, but that'll be confirmed. regardless in terms of where that's at. Hopefully they're going to announce some fight cards, or some full fight cards when that happens as well. So I'm sure there'll be plenty of news to talk about next week, but that covers it for this week.